Hello and welcome to the Nano Film Improv Podcast. I'm Dave Heron. This podcast is about my trials and tribulations associated with improv comedy and doing it, performing it, rehearsing it. So this is really a cathartic outpouring of the things that I've learnt, the things that I'm struggling with, and an opportunity to share with you and hear from you also some of the things that have worked for you, and equally there'll be some things on this podcast that you have tried that don't work for you. It's all very subjective. My experience level is, well, I've had a few years experience doing improv. I've taught a bit of improv. I've performed with a whole range of exciting and talented improvisers and learnt from sets that have gone well and sets that haven't gone well. And this is all part of an evolution for me as well. So you're very welcome in joining me on this podcast. So this week I wanted to talk about playing to corpse, in effect trying to get real belly laughs during improv scenes. Now, I'll get into where I've reached a little bit later on, but I think it probably takes a little bit of a history lesson to kind of tell you where I've kind of come from, which will give you an idea of where exactly I am now with my improv. So when I first started doing improv, of course, like most students of improv, I was learning the craft, creating wonderful scenes with deep meaning and emotion, watching clever games like Game of the Scene or Callbacks or short-form games. These were well put together improv sets that you see all the time and that we've all been part of if we're lucky enough to be part of a good improv troupe. Proper, solid improv. I also learned what not to do from very experienced improvisers, telling me that I couldn't talk or show about sex, I couldn't pimp someone out. That's when you bestow upon someone a slightly embarrassing feature or thing that they have to do. I couldn't see violence. There were so many restrictions on things that I couldn't do, yet I saw all these other things in other art forms, including comedy. So what I found for quite a period of time is that improv had become this very safe space. It was improv comedy, but yet a lot of the improv that I was doing was more around the creative nature of scenes with connections between the characters, quite serious improv really, rather than stuff that you would typically expect to see within stand-up comedy, something with real true belly laughs. I wasn't really seeing that in many improv shows. Now I know that these topics have to be handled very delicately, whether you're a new improviser or an experienced improviser, because it isn't just the way that you handle it on stage, actually the audience themselves have to be ready for this as well. So there is always a degree of gauging what's funny and what's not, and what's sensitive and what's deemed acceptable for the vast majority of audiences. But it was more than that too, I was finding. Experienced improvisers and teachers saying, don't argue, don't start a scene with a problem. As I said earlier, don't pimp each other out. Don't use real names. Don't play on people's real attributes, physical or otherwise. There were lots of rules about things that you couldn't do, which I found, as I said, in other art forms to be completely acceptable, particularly in comedy. Indeed, if I think about one of my favourite comedies around, Curb Your Enthusiasm, this takes all of those things. There's constant arguing. They always start with a problem. They pimp each other out. They use their real names. They play on real attributes about those individuals. And yet I found that comedy absolutely hilarious. So why wasn't that acceptable in improv? And even now, I still haven't found that answer. Maybe that's something that I'll get into when I speak to lots of people about this. But it just dawned on me that a lot of the improv that I'm seeing and I'm doing myself is very safe for very good reason. But I wasn't getting true belly laughs that sometimes you get with a lot of the more risky, on-the-edge comedy, particularly in things like stand-up comedy or indeed avant-garde sitcoms. So in early 2023, my good friend Ed Pithy, who runs Dingbats in Hawley, messaged myself, George Butcher, Stuart Finlayson and Martin Connaughton to see if, quite frankly, Ed could do a bit more improv himself rather than simply just teaching it. So we got together, had a session or two where we just mucked around, tried out different things. But for the first time in my whole improv journey, there was true belly laughs. We were trying to make each other laugh. Now, that can sometimes be seen as a bit of a sin by experienced teachers of improv and honers of the craft to try and make each other laugh. But that's only wrong when the audience aren't in on the joke as well. If they're not finding it funny and it's only the improvisers that are finding it funny, then that's a problem. But I couldn't see why you couldn't have proper belly laughs mucking around with the audience in on the joke as well. Why couldn't that be part of improv? And so that's what started to happen with the five of us when we formed our working title name, Slapbot. That's what we found to start happening in our rehearsals. And they were so much fun. I think we had like a Wednesday night we would meet up. They were so much fun, things I would really look forward to because I knew I'd leave the rehearsals with a splitting headache because I'd laughed so hard. Things I'd never done in any art form before. I was essentially just mucking around with my mates, but doing the art that I loved. And so we did many rehearsals and then started doing some gigs. And the first couple of gigs went really, really well. And then we had a blip. We had one gig at the Hall Theatre in Crawley where it just didn't work. It just didn't connect. And we reflected on this afterwards and couldn't work out why. And when we debriefed with each other, we realised there was one common fact that we all agreed on that wasn't there. And that was we weren't having fun. All our rehearsals had been proper fun. They'd been belly laughs. They'd been taking the mickey out of each other. They'd been challenging each other. But when we did this gig, we were so in our heads about how the narrative structure might work or what the format of this macro scene might be, that in fact it came across very much to the audience that we were very much in our heads. We were thinking about it rather than just doing fun improv. And it was quite a standout moment for me, and I'm never going to forget it because after coming away from our debrief and understanding the number one thing we really needed to do was just have fun with each other, thereafter it became kind of plain sailing. Now, that's not to say that we weren't going to work hard on the structure. We've worked very hard on getting the right format, working out how the games or the sets interlink with each other during a show. And we've also thought about how the show might be wrapped up in its totality, what themes it might have. So there's been a lot of hard work behind the scenes. But at its core, it's been about having fun. Us doing a rehearsal on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night and ensuring every time we leave, we've had a right good laugh. And we've had true, as I say, I use the term belly laughs, but I think you understand what I mean by that. A true crying with laughter experience. And that, for me, set the bar for how I wanted my improv to be going forward. Now, I still very much enjoy the two-prov, more serious improv that I've been inspired by the Actor's Nightmare run by Steve Steen, which, as many listeners will know, is one of my favourite improv sets of all time and strongly recommend that you go and see it. But this was something different. This was moving away from good, solid improv where you've got connections between characters, relationships, etc., to something that still had that at its core, but more fundamentally was something that was funny. Something that truly was improv comedy, that the audience would find funny and that the improvisers themselves would find funny as well. So we'd found the niche, and it was the first time I realized this is really what I want to do. I want to have that split as an improviser between learning the craft, but also having fun with that craft as well, and having something that I can truly have fun with. Even if I had no shows lined up, would I still rehearse with those guys every week just to have fun? Absolutely. And I've been very fortunate to have had a number of good shows with different groups over the last few years that I've been doing improv, and I'm very, very grateful. However, the best gig that I think I've ever done was as part of the Maidstone Improv Festival in 2024. This was a gig that was about an hour's drive away from where we lived. We had an audience of about 25 to 30 people in a village hall in Maidstone, and of the audience, we knew about 2 or 3 people in total. That was it. The rest of the people we didn't know. And it was one of the best gigs we've ever done. I was crying with laughter on stage because of what my other fellow improvisers were doing. There were some scenes that were so memorable and so predictable. You knew what was going to happen when somebody stepped on stage because you knew where the joke was going. The challenging between each other, that's one of the things that you don't often see in an improv scene, mainly because it's poo-pooed a bit by experienced improv teachers, not to challenge each other, don't put anyone under the bus. But that's what our improv in Slackbot has relied upon. It's relied upon that relentless challenging back and forth. The audience see that, as I've talked about previously with IPA, impressive, playful, and audience aware. The audience see when you're challenging each other, and they love it when an improviser overcomes that little mountain and then throws it back. I think Will Hines describes it as playing ping pong. It's back and forth. You're not trying to whack the balls that goes out of the court, but you are trying to put the opponent under a little bit of stress, but hopefully that they can hit it back as well. But that gig will stand out for me as one of the best that I've ever had, because we barely knew any of the audience, and yet they found it very funny as well. So as well as me finding it funny, and my mates finding it funny on stage as well, the audience were also laughing as well. And that was really, really lovely. And that's the point I knew that it is absolutely fine to have slightly risky comedy in an improv setting where the audience understand that you're in control and you're not going to go completely off-piste, but equally they're also in on the joke as well. And it was a wonderful, shared, hilarious experience between the improvisers and the audience members too. And that's something that I want to capture and keep moving on. And that's the playing to corpse. It's trying to make the other improvisers on stage laugh, corpse, eyeball them, go close up to them in their face, make funny sounds, lip sounds, odd sounds like that, where you're trying to make them corpse. You're trying to make them break character because the audience are watching them as well, and they want you to do that. And that's been a huge source of pleasure and fun for me, and something I very much want to continue. At the core of this, of course, is I think the only reason why this really works is because we're all mates. And if we weren't, or if you don't know somebody that well, or you don't know the sense of humour, or you don't know the boundaries, then this makes it far more difficult. We are mates who know each other, we know what our boundaries are, we know what makes each other funny, we know what each improviser brings to the table as well. And that's another interesting facet as well, I didn't realise until I really analysed why we as a group do well. It's because each of us brings something slightly different to the table. George is a wonderful disruptor. He's constantly looking for challenge, but equally he's a bit of a visionary. He knows how the structure of some of these sets should work. Martin is amazing at being able to pick out minute detail, also being able to call back, but also a bit of a visionary as well. Ed is fantastic at justifying something. You can pimp him out on anything and he'll immediately justify it without even blinking and then throw it back on you. Stuart will take anything and just run with it. He'll ride the wave. He's excellent at his object work, and he will also ride the wave. Anything that's thrown at him, he will just take. All these different facets to come together, and I realise we can't all be the same type of improviser. We've got to have the same shared approach, but equally we all bring very different strengths to the set. And I'm very much hoping to do more sets and rehearsals with these wonderful gentlemen in the new year, and hopefully you get a chance to see us perform. We'd love to see you there, wherever there is. Have you ever experienced proper belly laughs during a set? Have you been made to corpse by another improviser? Have you had crying fits whilst you're on stage, laughing so hard that you just have to leave the set? I'd love to hear what experiences you've had, what truly comedic experiences you've had on stage, or indeed shows that you've seen yourself. I'd love to know what sets you've also seen that have made you cry with laughter because they've been so funny. So thanks very much for listening to the Nano Film Improv podcast, and I'll catch you in the next one.